Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's great to see a big group here. I'm Bobby Hackett. I'm president of the Bonner Foundation, where I've been for 29 years and counting. And I don't even know how many years it goes now, but Scott and I met at an event related to a mutual friend of ours. And as we were talking about what we did for work, I learned that Scott's a sociology faculty at San Jose State University, and that he had been, at that point, probably for not quite 10 years, been teaching a class on social action, which is very usual for a sociology faculty member, teach about organizing and social change and that kind of stuff. But what really piqued my interest was that in Scott's class, students launch campaigns. They get a group of at least 3, they can launch a campaign. That's the expectation. And this session here is going to talk about that particular model for teaching students about social action by having them do social action. And once you make that decision, it then suggests or requires a whole bunch of other redesign for a course. And we then started, I said, we got to bring that to our network and bring it nationally as best we can. And we've been working on that now for a number of years, done lots of little webinars, well, face-to-face stuff. And this school year, we've been running a webinar series. He's really running it. I'm the tech support for a group of faculty, including Christine Robinson, who's on the call, where each month we meet and they're walking them through how to design their own course that teaches students to do social action by having them do social action. This gathering today is really an opportunity presented by the Brown Community Organizing a group. Ken is on the call. Ken, can you say hello real quick?
Yes, hi, and good to be with you. I'm excited to see all the people that have turned out. The Brown Community Organizing Initiative is at Brown University. It grows out of the work of a number of schoolmates who were organizers, 1 or 2 still are organizers, who decided that they wanted to see if Brown would create an archive in one of the libraries, the John Hay Library, of community organizing material. That led to, they agreed, that led to our acquisition of a set of 100 videotaped interviews of organizers done by the Center for Community Change, diverse organizers, really interesting stuff. We met Scott and Bobby because we decided that we would spread the word across the country that these videotaped interviews are available online for use in teaching. We had a meeting December 7th of about 60 people who teach in academic settings, some community organizers, archivists, to compare notes. And we're meeting again on May 19th. I think everybody on the call is invited to that as a follow-up, and this workshop is one of 4 that grew out of the December 7th event. So that's a little background.
Wonderful. And Ken was a community organizer, so I've not been an organizer. I'm more a facilitator. But it's great to be here. It's great to see so many people here. And again, the twist here is that we're talking about a course where students are actually going to do the organizing and the implications of that, both for you professionally and for the actual teaching, and also what happens to those young people as they go off out in the world. With that, I'm gonna hand it over to Scott.
Welcome, everyone. Very excited to be here with you today. So what Bobby's gonna upload really comes from this book that I wrote called Change, A Student Guide to Social Action. It was really, I was writing this book when I met Bobby, and it's really directed at the students. And it's for faculty, but it's for the students to actually then launch a campaign and all the things that students need to know. And then what I realized was, Bobby and I started talking about mainstreaming this across college campuses throughout the country, that there needed to be a companion book to this book. So I've written that book. It's 99% done. We need to make a few edits, but it's basically done. It's called Change, A Guide to Teaching Social Action. And that's for all of you. It's for faculty, it's for staff who would want to teach it, and for student-led courses. We've had a few of those where students pick up the mantle and teach it through a student-led. But anyone wants to teach it on a college campus, that's what this book is. It's going to come out in January 2022. I sent you a draft, and I apologize as I, continually editing. It's a humbling experience always to hand out your work before it's yet published, but realize it's continually going through these modifications, these edits. So you have an early draft of the book. So as any of you know who are writers, and most of you are, when you're writing a book, your mind is just totally in that book. And so when I first wrote what we're going to do today, Bobby really asked me to not talk about the nuts and bolts of the book. And so there's a lot of nuts and bolts as you read through, how to teach it. So if you have any questions around the nuts and bolts, just email me. I'll respond to those nuts and bolts questions. I'm glad to do so. And that's really a lot of what happens in those webinars, this 9-month process we're taking Christine Robinson and almost 20 faculty and staff through over this past year. But what I'm going to focus on is, how is this model, this social action model, different from teaching about community organizing or change or social movement? So all my comments when I talk about the various chapters of the book are going to be with that in mind. How is it different? So chapter 1, the first line starts with a definition. I always, think it's important, to define the terms. So I kind of define what this model it brings to social action, or the definition of social action. So I just want to turn your attention, so at least we're all on the same page. You might agree or disagree with it, but at least this is my understanding of and my perspective of this model. And it says social action occurs when everyday people band together to develop their power in order to change policy. So that could be an hour-long conversation of all of us about every one of those words. The everyday people part, very important, not talking about, my students think about change. We have a monument for Martin Luther King. We have a monument for Tommy Smith. These are people they do change, but not me. So it's getting everyday people, right? Band together. This notion of creating a team, a collective, not just individuals, but coming together as a collective to join forces together. Develop power. Again, a chapter in both of these books have a chapter just on power, because my students, and I imagine some of yours, they don't feel empowered they can bring about change. In fact, everything I'm doing in this is to give them that sense of empowerment. And then lastly, maybe the most important of all those is to change policy. That this is about changing policy, changing rules, laws, regulations, norms, procedures, protocols, practices of institutions. That's what and I say to the students, it's going to be, you'll hear this throughout this talk, I don't care what policy they change, but that's what it's about. They choose the policy, could be on the campus, the city, the county, the state, the feds, but change a policy and propose that. And we'll talk more about that, but this is what this social action model is about. I provide in section B of that first chapter a long history of social action on campuses, and I actually shortened it because it goes another 8 pages. And I hope you found that of interest as you're reading. But there's this long history of social action on campuses. Some of us might not know some of all that history, and that's why I focused on that part of the history rather than the more present part, because we probably know more about that. One thing about it is that what I hoped by doing that was to show the inter and intragenerational struggles of that these issues, whether they be food, which happened at Harvard University with the butter rebellion, and happened on my campus in 2017-18, where the food became an issue on the college campuses and what kind of food were being served. That has been an issue from the very beginning of social action. Obviously, race and racism has been central focus to the issues on college campuses. So these are issues that are intergenerational, and I was hoping to folks would see that point. It was also designed, I think, to have that be used you give that to students to see, so they know that they're a part of a long history of social action on campus. In that section C, I talk about the benefits of social action. There's been a lot of research looking at community organizing, social movements, and social action on college campuses, critical thinking skills, better understanding of how systems works, learn to solve problems, greater sense of social responsibility. Tied to that, the influencing the whole student body to become more civically engaged because students are taking social action increased leadership skills. These are all benefits. And so in section D is the call to social action. Like, why not, if we're doing, this is already happening in some sectors on the campus, why not bring it to the larger student body by having not just maybe one class, but multiple classes on a college campus doing social action. So there's that call in section D. And I would say, before I talk about the developing a class, I would say that I'm clear, at least in that the goal of it is to teach democracy and how power works and give them a firsthand experience. And I'm not so much as interested in training the next generation of community organizers, even though many of my students become organizers, but rather is to train democratic citizens and participants. So that's kind of my perspective of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So let's talk about chapter 2 and many things to consider. This is developing a social action class. And this is once you kind of decided to do so, what are the things to consider? And there are many. In chapter 2, if you look at the highlights of it, academic course versus co-curricular, prerequisites, creating the syllabus, the style, the norms, how do you get students in, to recruit them, the building of the allies, the role of place, every semester or each year. These are all things to consider before teaching. And there's some nuts and bolts in there that I want you to look at. But to get around that framing question of what makes this different, if you look at the beginning part of the syllabus, how to create a syllabus on section 2C, I start with, in my syllabus, something that many social action or service learning classes have, which is this quote by Zung Quan, which is, "Tell me and I forget, show me and I remember, involve me and I understand." That's a basic service learning kind of philosophical question about how people learn. But then I follow it with, "Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did and it never will." And that's from Frederick Douglass, of course. And that's to let students know that not only are they going to be doing something, you're going to be engaged in the community, but it's going to be about making demands and it's going to be about power. That's what differentiates this experience from a normal, either a service learning course or normal service learning courses. And I think if we're just going to be teaching about change or movement or community organizing. I then talk about the student victories and why I think that's important. And I mentioned them in the reading in both books. Why I think that's key is that my students have won 15 victories in the past 14 years, and that they know that they can be successful, that it's not just Martin King or Cesar Chavez. We have a monument of Cesar Chavez on, not just them, but they can be successful. Students can actually have victories. An important point in that syllabus section is, where do the campaigns occur? And when I talk publicly, I get criticism for, like, you're just sending students that are ill prepared into the community to quote unquote save the poor. And that's horrific, And I argue back that 60 to 70% of the campaigns that students do are on the college campus themselves. So they are the experts, because a lot of times they are the ones that are the person that being impacted by the policy itself. So whether it be pushing out a racist faculty member or staff member, or who's made a racist or a series of racist comments, or sexually harassed students, or working on student debt, or the variety of campaigns that are on a college campus, that most of them, I'd say 60 to 70 are on a campus, where 30 to 40 are in the community. And when they're in the community, I actually work with organizations, and many times they actually send organizers into my classroom when the students are discussing them. So they're not just on their own, they're working with grassroots leadership in support of a larger community campaign. And I'll talk more about how I connect to those community campaigns, but it's not about, I'd be clear, it's not about going into marginalized communities and organizing them to join a campaign that the students have come up with. That's not what this model is about. Another key part of this model, is described in the syllabus in that section on 2C, is that it's got to start early. The campaigns must start early. If you start them halfway through the semester, you're not going to get to do social action. I start the campaigns of issue identification on class 2. And that's actually what drove me to write the book, the first book called On Change, a student guide to social action, is because while I was using all these amazing books that many of us know, whether it be Stirred Up, Renku Sen, or Joe Maneri's book on radical democracy, and there's a whole host of others, that I've used, that I decided that all those books usually start at issue development in the middle, like on chapter 6 or 7. On my work, it's like day 2 that they're starting their campaign. It's very important. We'll talk about that, choosing the campaign, but it's really important. They, of course, they have to try to change a policy. They have to have a minimum of 3 students. That's a nuts and bolts kind of thing, but it's important for you to know. And they have to have passion for the issue. The thing that they don't have to do is it has to be what I agree with. And that's how I'm allowed to do it. Otherwise, I would have been pushed off a long time ago by the campus administration, and saying you can't do that. And we could talk more about the campus administration, but I say it could be a liberal, it could be a radical, it could be conservative, it could be social democrat, it could be libertarian perspective. I don't determine that. That's up to you. Or it could be no ideology at all. One last thing I want to say that's really important is that on the grading part, is that the students do a campaign notebook. Why that's important is that this campaign notebook then gets passed down to the next generation of social action students that I teach or other faculty are teaching on the campus, that they can use and keep the campaign alive. Because as many of us know, you can't win many campaigns in a semester. Very challenging. You can do 2 or 3 social actions, but tough to win a campaign, even though, by the way, we have done so maybe 3 or 4 times, but generally it takes a couple of years. And so that campaign notebook gets passed down. So that's a really important part of the model. Of course, it has a portfolio, but that's similar to any service learning course where this integration of academic knowledge and community work is going on. I would just say briefly, another nuts and bolts thing, I'll say they do about 1.5 hours to 2 hours a week. Half of that time has to be doing something, tabling, postering, giving organizational raps, marches, other tactics. And it's taught across disciplines. Dr. Shakow in College of New Jersey is teaching it in an anthropology course on climate change. Kent Glesner is down at Middlebury, is teaching it in his economics class. I'm in sociology. A social work professor is teaching now at San Jose State, as well as a political scientist. So this can be done in a variety of disciplines. Okay, I'm going to talk about launching the campaigns, but before I do, I'm just going to take my breath, stop, and to see if there's maybe 2 or 3 questions that we can respond to, just hearing the basic model of how it's different than teaching about community organizing.
And at this point, it's probably easiest if we use the chat to post the questions.
Perfect. I see Lee's asked, are there any differences in how you teach your course in the first year? Absolutely, compared to the years later? Absolutely. I mean, one is, in fact, in the book, every section has what I learned from teaching it from from the first year to after now doing it 15 years. So obviously you get more knowledge and you learn kind of the flow of how much is possible in a class. And also, I'll tell you, one of the big things I learned is, I used to do everything I can because I thought the group dynamic was so important to keep together. And after I learned that sometimes there's a group dynamic that's just not going to work for whatever reason, personality wise. And we've broken up. I encourage them to break up groups sometimes mid-semester and join other campaigns. That's something that I learned, and she's had a very positive, it's been very positive. And I can talk more about that, but that's just one example. Another, how often do students take on the campaigns? I would say if it's a hot campaign, lots of energy, it's taken up. And I'll say the minimum wage campaign, 4 classes in a row picked up that campaign and continued it. And in fact, by the last year, the 4th time, every student, 30 students chose that campaign. I didn't choose that, but all the students chose to work on the minimum wage campaign. Same thing happened after Hurricane Katrina. They had a 4-year campaign. They were quite successful, got 2 bills into Congress, 40 co-sponsors, and that was picked up semester after semester. It was called the Gulf Coast Civic Works Project. So it does happen, but it also happens where they don't pick it up, where I think they're going to pick it up, and then it just sits there, and I bring it in the following semester and try to keep it going. There's one that might get restarted. There's some interest in it coming up, as I know, is on this having to create San Jose State. It was used as a site for the Asian American concentration camps, so as a beginning spot to move folks, quote, into the internment camps. And so there is a movement to have a statue built on our campus to recognize that. And so there's some movement again around that, but that's sat for 5 years. Maybe one more question. And then I'll respond to these other ones in personally. Are students working with identified mentors off campus? Absolutely. So my goal, because I generally have 3 to 4 campaigns going in a class. I can't do everything. I'm a mentor to all of those campaigns, but I encourage them to get another faculty mentor involved. And there's a group, I'm sure your campuses, we have 2,000 faculty. There's 15 or 20 that are very active, and they become mentors. And I ask them to serve as mentors. So not just on the campus, but also in the community, particularly if they're working with a community organization, they actually have a mentor that I connect them with a community org and they take it. A lot of people ask why they would do that, because, and I would argue, what they would argue actually is that it's, even though it takes time out of their day because they're busy, they see it as training that next generation of community organizers. That maybe some of them, and some of my students do. I've had many students actually go into community organizing. Okay, so I'm going to stop there.
Scott, let me interrupt you. A key question, which I think you should speak to here. What advice do you have for convincing reluctant deans, faculty, senior staff the social action should be taught at our college?
So it's addressed in chapter 1 of the book, but I'm going to address it at the end because that's for sure, really, it's a key question. I will just say briefly to it. One is the dean is very supportive of the work, my dean, and I'm very transparent with the dean. I tell the dean about all the social action campaigns that are going on that semester. It obviously is, it's a point of contention because sometimes they're going after the provost or they're going after, their target is the president sometimes. So they're sensitive, let's put it that way. And I'm not going to say it's not without bumps, but it can be done. And partly because I tell the administration is that my students will know the history. My students will know of the various tactics, and not to go to DEFCON 10 and take over your president's office. Even though if a student decides to do that, that's up to them. I don't stop them. Sometimes the students do what they want, but I will encourage them to actually start off on low heat and move through kind of a lower heat to get to higher heat if necessary. But they will be trained they will have a better chance to be more successful, I would argue, and successful in the sense of, instead of, let's say, at Syracuse University, where they handed them 15 demands that would have very little chance of getting, it's just too many demands for them to even respond to. My students will come with very specific demands, and I would argue that it would make the campus a better space. But I'm gonna hold off and say more at the end. But it's a very good question, a very important one. So I'm gonna talk about launching student campaigns, which is the chapter 3, and I'm gonna show a video of a look, because I think it's important to see it rather than, I'm gonna talk more about it, but actually a chance to see what it looks like. I show this video in class 3, so it's early, because I want them to see that there have been students previously. This is a video that was done by a documentarian on the social action class that I teach. They highlighted 3 campaigns in that, one from 2007, one from 2012, and one from 2019. So they looked at 3 different campaigns. And I just want to frame it in this language of, we say a lot of the times, on your mark, get set, go. Ours is, I'm not sure I think it's on your mark, get set, go. That's how I usually say it. Mine is on your mark, go, get set. Is the go part is that you got to get students engaged early in social action. Otherwise, it's just it's very difficult to actually get social action done in the limited time we have. So I'm going to show this video, and then maybe we can say a few words about it.
One of the things that I've learned the most is how our democracy functions. It takes a lot of effort to get your voice heard past the money. So, it really takes a lot of organization. But, I've learned that people have really a lot of passion for social justice and for the right thing. And that's one thing that's given me hope throughout the campaign.
I'd like to know a little bit more about Measure D. So Measure D is an initiative that's on the ballot this November, on November 6th. And the measure does is say that increasing the minimum wage from $8 to $10.
We're actually implementing real social policies. So we're not just learning about the issue, but we're actually going out and deciding and organizing how and what exactly we want to implement.
So we are asking students to sign our petition, and we have laptops asking students to support in their demands. We are also gathering personal stories of students who are and have faced any sort of housing and food insecurity.
First demand is to establish 12 beds here at the university for the homeless students that require a bed.
100,000 jobs! And when do we want it? Now! What do we want? 100,000 jobs!
And what we decided to do after reflecting was create something called the Gulf Coast Civic Works Project.
The idea is simple: create 100,000 jobs for local residents to rebuild their homes and local communities while being paid a living wage.
While some students on high school and college campuses, through the classes they take, get the opportunity to volunteer with organizations dealing with social issues facing their communities and the larger society, very few learn how to implement policies which try to get at the root causes of these problems. At San Jose State University, in the heart of Silicon Valley in California, one class is different.
The students in my class have been inspired by FDR's idea for an economic bill of rights. Now, Franklin Roosevelt put this idea out in 1944 that the country needed an economic bill of rights in order to obtain life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. One is the right to a good job. Two is the right to a living wage. A third one is the right to a good education. A fourth is the right to health care.
In 2011, Scott Myers-Lipton's social action class began a drive to increase the minimum wage in San Jose. As the 2012 presidential election approached, they qualified the demand as Measure D on the November ballot.
Hi. Would you like to know more about Measure D?
Yeah.
It's about raising the minimum wage here in San Jose. Yeah. Cards, so saying what the facts are about raising the minimum wage here in San Jose. We have commitment cards, which has you could do phone banking with us. We can also go canvassing, telling people about how minimum wage would be beneficial for residents. We have voter reg. Are you a voter?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you registered? Okay.
Maybe if I could take a flyer, just, and I could encourage people.
Would you like a sticker?
Sure, yeah, I'll support you guys.
People are starting to see that this is actually something that can be possible. They're getting excited about it. They're seeing that we're actually going to stick with this and we're going to go through the distance. We're getting a lot of people that are like, what can we do? Everyone wants to be a part of something that is actually going to work. People always think democracy doesn't work. We don't know what to do. Voting doesn't, and my vote doesn't count. But now they're seeing like these students are serious and they obviously know how to get things on a ballot.
I'm doing this because as a single parent myself, I feel that it's hard to live beyond my basic necessities. So I can't afford rent. I can't afford PG&E. I can't put enough money in my gas tank to make sure I get to my son. So this raising the minimum wage has been personal to me. It impacted my life and made me realize that I can be about the change in my community, that I can encourage and be empowered to support my community and myself and my son to have a better opportunity in Silicon Valley and be able to be self-sufficient.
Put you guys on my Instagram so my friends can see the vote for this, because I'm sure no one.
I can put it on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Yeah.
What's an outreach strategy?
We do get people involved.
What you doing to get people involved?
Scott Myers-Lipton's social action class drew its first prominent notice in 2007 when students, reacting to the devastation caused by Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans and elsewhere along the Gulf Coast, attempted to develop a nationwide college student coalition to demand 100,000 Civic Works jobs to help address reconstruction efforts. Class time is spent refining tactics and addressing challenges.
You need to be totally clear in your mind, what are you asking for? Petitions, go to the website, letter writing campaign, make a donation, help us with the summit. Do you know someone else that needs to be involved? What are your contacts politically? Do you have any political contacts? Because we're trying to get these non-binding resolutions passed. Do you know any politicians?
With the 2008 presidential election race shaping up, one strategy they use is to contact the campaign offices of prospective presidential candidates to see if they would take a stand on the issue.
So I've been following my candidate and trying to get his schedule so that we can dispatch some other college students across the country to ask the questions about the Gulf Coast Civic Works project. So far, I've had some good telephone calls with my candidate's office.
It always has to be the students driving it. It can't be the professor coming in, having an idea and saying, look, this is what we're going to do. It has to come from the students, because Otherwise, then it's like I've got a political ideology that I'm trying to get you all to follow. But I think if it's driven by the students and it's driven around this idea of they're trying to make the community better.
The biggest challenge that we face as students is not feeling empowered, not feeling that this is something worth separating some time out of your day to do. Yes, we have classes. I came to this school and I said to myself, I'm not just going to be a student, I'm going to be an engaged student. I'm not just going to be a citizen, I'm going to be an active citizen. If you're a student and you don't think that it's important, my question to you is, if not now, when? If not you, then who?
So thoughts, that gives you some feel of a launch campaign, right? Those are 3 campaigns that were in movement. Two of those campaigns, the students won. Minimum wage, if I always say, if my students went to Harvard, Yale, or Stanford, rather than at a working class institution, bringing the largest minimum wage increase in the history of the country, a group of students of color, mostly, that would have been, should have been history making. But you don't know about it, but because it was our reality in San Jose and the United States. But they did win that campaign, and they built a coalition that won 60-40 in 2012, and then pushed it to $15, from 8 to 15. So very successful. And the other one, they just won that right before I left the university to write this book. They got 12 emergency beds, $3 million for rental assistance. So they won that campaign as well. The president was not happy at all at the students or me, but at the end of the experience, she was pleased. So sometimes it might be rocky, but you can get through that rockiness. I tell my students, don't have ad hominem attacks, treat people with respect. So I think there's a way to do it that you can do it successfully. So any comments?
I have a question about, because you said the action is driven by the students, right? But then how do you work in the campaign notebooks? If each of the groups is sort of deciding on the action, when do you sort of roll in what previous groups have done?
It's a great question, and I'm just going to share this picture, and you'll get a chance to see what it actually looks like in my class. So this is on class 2, and this is under kind of the go part, which is in class 2, right? There, because now the class is pretty well known. Have them know that they're going to be doing a campaign. The other thought maybe they're just going to be talking about it. So on class 2, they know on class 1 now they're going to do it, and now class 2 they start doing it. And by doing it, they have to select a campaign. So there are 4 different ways the students can select a campaign. Here is a picture of the students here. They're in their groups, right? So there are 4 different campaigns being talked about in these various groups. One is previous campaigns that you talked about. And all it takes is 3 students to select. So out of a class of 30 to 35, 3 students have to select that campaign. So one is past campaigns. So they look at that are actually ongoing, and the students come in and make a pitch. So they are trying to say, join our campaign. Another is these campaign notebooks, which some of them are they're non-active. And so I then present the campaign notebook and kind of act as the person that they would be the one that would, the knowledge base about that campaign. I say, read this campaign notebook. It has the history, the timeline, it has the tactics, the strategy, it has the power base, how they develop their power in that campaign notebook. So that's a second one. A third one is community campaigns. Community members on the far right, that's a community member selling her, pitching her policy change to the students. And then the fourth one, after they all leave, we do this on class 1, we start talking about what ideas they have that they might want to bring. And generally, at least 1 or 2 new ideas come in every time from that, and where 3 students then say, I want to be a part of that campaign. So that's how it's done, and it's done very early on that class 2. I hope that answered that question. And by the way, none of those students have ever done social action, ever. Alicia never done it once, who became one of the leaders of that minimum wage camp. Diana, she came with the idea because her mom came to San Jose State in 1968 when Tommy Smith, where you saw that image of him raising his hand. We have a statue now for Tommy and John, that image. she asked her mother, what did you do during that time? She said, I didn't do anything. I went to class. So Diana came looking for something and then found the social action class. Anyone else?
One question here is, what kind of training do students have before engaging with communities?
If you look at chapter 3 in what I sent you, I have on your mark, go. That's the go part is what you just saw. They're in the class 2 through 4, there's a process, very nuts and bolts, but I take them through a process to winnow it down to figure out what they're going to choose to do. And then the training begins. So is it Corey who asked that? Very good question. The training begins. So training in setting the tone of how are they going to be a group around group dynamics. So that gets set. Change theory. I have a macro level analysis, a micro level analysis of change, and then kind of a service learning analysis. So there's 3 change theories that are presented. Then building power, how to build power and how to recruit and develop student allies. Then there's this walking tour, because there's a huge history, like on all our campuses, around justice issues. So we do a walking tour, then research, because the students have to have research, right? So there's a historical overview done, a power map, and a target analysis. And usually a group is anywhere from 3 to 7, 8, 10. They break up into groups and do that research. And what happens by doing that research at that time, they realize, oh my gosh, I really have to know more, because I'm already starting going out and talking about it. I'm already doing my organizational wraps as part of the building power part. I have to know more. A lot of people critique the model saying, well, you're putting the cart before the horse. They should get everything lined up. I would argue that this model actually encourages them, because they're out there and they realize I have to have more knowledge, and that makes them want to even do the research more. So group dynamics is, again, I've done group dynamics twice. It's really important. The reason the students, quote unquote, fail in a campaign is usually the group dynamics breaks down. They can't seem to get their group together to move collectively. And I have multiple sections on that. This important strategy and tactics, which would be, anyone teaching community organizing would know those, and probably you all know them too. Everything from rallies to marches to sit-ins to feign-ins. And we go through the whole plethora of what is possible in tactics, and then and connect that to a strategy. And then finally, the campaign kickoff. And the campaign kickoff is super exciting for the students, I would say. It's where they announce to the community that they've begun a campaign. And I can't tell you the excitement that's going on in the students' minds. They're just so happy to actually launch a campaign. And it usually takes that time period to give you a framework. By class 16, 17, maybe a little more than halfway through, the students launch their campaigns. They publicly declare them. And that then puts even more pressure on to do the research and the history and that kind of stuff, because they're now declaring their campaign to the community. And I'll show you a very brief, this is a 2-minute clip of a campaign launch, where they actually then declare that they're starting a campaign. This was a campaign where they actually spent, and which happens a lot of times, by the way, several months in negotiation with the decision makers to try to get them to agree to the demands, and not even going public. So a lot of it's done on the backside, not public. In this case, there was a comment that was made in a meeting on the campus by a Tower board member, part of our fundraising group, that made the comment that Latinas don't have the DNA to be successful. That was a comment made. The vice president was in the room and said nothing, let that go. A very high-ranking Latina who was also in the room was so upset, she went to professors to try to get them to move the university. They spent 6 months trying to get the university to respond with no luck, with no positive response. So a professor came into our class on that second day and said, this has gone on. I know you all just won the minimum wage campaign. I know you all can do social action in this class. Can you help me? And so 14 students, 13 Latinas, Latinos, Latinx folks, and 1 African-American joined that campaign. And they spent 2 months on the backside working with the president and the president's chief of staff to try to get a resolution to fire that person, to push that person off the board. They were not successful. It's a very drawn out, like any campaign has its ups and downs, but I want to give you that background. I knew this was going to be a big deal, and I warned the university that they should respond to the students, but they were not going to. So this is what it looked like. And this was their campaign launch. And I will show this to you. It's a 2-minute. I would say this about campaign launches. Generally, they choose a press conference, a rally/press conference. There could be other ways to launch, but my students have generally chosen that strategy as their way to launch a campaign. So this was their launch of their campaign.
Rage on the San Jose State campus again over new allegations of racism and the administration's alleged slow response. This time, though, it involves a university board member who reportedly denigrated the mental capability of Latina students. Tonight, students are calling for the university president to take action. NBC Bay Area's Michelle Roberts joins us live at San Jose State, where that rally took place today. Michelle.
Dozens of students marched through campus today, and that rally ended at the president's office. They were urging him to have a meeting. That meeting didn't happen, but they are asking the university to take a stand against racism.
Whose university?
Our university.
These students say they're marching for racial equality on the San Jose State campus.
Let's raise our fist in solidarity.
The rally is a call to action for school administrators to remove a board member from the Tower Foundation, which deals with the investment and administration of all San Jose State philanthropic donations.
Whose university?
Our university.
The march comes after a board meeting in February, during which the board member allegedly made racist remarks.
A statement made by this major donor follows: I contribute to this university because these little Latinas do not have the DNA to be successful. The vice president was there and said nothing.
Today, dozens of students marched to University President Mo Kayumi's office to meet face-to-face. The president's staff said he wasn't available, but he did release a statement saying in part, "Although I know some have been frustrated with the perceived lack of action since the incident occurred, we owe it to everyone to thoughtfully, thoroughly, and factually determine what occurred before taking action." The comment comes a year after he admitted to failing to recognize and intervene in the abuse of a freshman who was a victim of hate crimes on campus. Students say they will continue to rally until the board member is removed and an apology from the administration is given. There's just a lot of diversity here. And for someone to go ahead and say that about one specific race, that's just very shocking to me. The university isn't releasing the name of the board member who allegedly made these comments. They're also not giving a timeline if or when any action will come. Reporting live in San Jose, Michelle Roberts, NBC, Bay Area News.
So that was their kickoff event. Just to give you some perspective of it, 15 minutes before that, they came to me and said, this is going to be the greatest failure of all time. We only have a very few students. No one's here. There's no press. They were so nervous. And then all of a sudden, the students came. The press came, all their organizing work paid off. And then all those students had never done social action before. All of a sudden, they saw themselves on the press. They felt themselves, wow, we can do this. We have leadership skills. By the way, how long do you think it took the university to fire that board member after that kickoff campaign? About 2 days. They fired that person, plus the vice president, which the students didn't even ask for that, plus the vice president. And it took a little bit longer. It took about a month to get the letter of apology, but they got that as well. A letter of apology to the Latina who was in the room and nothing was said. So they got the two demands that they pushed forward. Do you notice how when they went to the president's office after the rally, they put their demands up there? Because I told them, I was like, most likely they're not going to meet with you. Incredibly, the president was right there with 2 armed police officers by his side. And that was just indicative of the students what do you think, we're going to jump him? What are you talking about? We're just we just want to talk to him. So that they were incensed by the police force in the president's office. Plus, so they put that up. And of course, that's reminisces back to Martin Luther putting that up on the church door. So bringing that history. And that's what you can do as faculty member to let them know this long story of history of gone social action. So I'll stop there and see if you have other comments. I got a question. How do you assign grades? Great question. So in the syllabus, you see 5, right? I give quizzes because my students, you have to give quizzes because 70-80% of my students are working. So I got to make sure they read. So I give quizzes to my students. That's just normal. But the key part is that campaign notebook, which is 20%, actually 40% of the grade. So a big part is that, or actually 20% for the campaign notebook, 40% for portfolios. And that's really, it's almost half their grade, is how well they're taking the information in the student guidebook and connecting it to the campaign. So this integration of theory and praxis that Paulo Freire talks about, that's really where the grade is being determined. And one of my favorite comments came from Maricela Castro, the person that came up with the idea for a minimum wage campaign. The day after they won the campaign for minimum wage at the ballot, the AP reporter said, well, man, you must have got an A in that class. You came up with the idea. And she said, well, actually, I got a B. He's a really tough professor. So it's kind of, I took that as pride. Like, even if you come up with the greatest idea, you still got to do the academic work. We're not giving you an A just because you came with a great idea. There's got to be this integration. And obviously a B is still a good grade too. It's above average. So that's on the grades. Any other thoughts or questions about this launching of the campaigns? And then we'll talk about the campaign implementation, because a lot of times the students launch the campaign and they're like, are we done yet? We're done, aren't we? I'm like, no. You've just begun the campaign. You've just started the campaign, right? Yeah, so there you go. Can you address Corey's question about preparation of the students? I thought I did that by talking about, if you look on chapter 3, the whole section in here on launching campaigns, really from C to I in that is the preparation of the students. Now, that doesn't mean I don't meet with the students, like when they're about to meet with a target or a decision maker, that I don't meet with them back in the pre-COVID days in person, now maybe over Zoom, but I would meet with them in preparation, because there's a lot of decisions that the students have to make when they're doing a launch or they're about to do an action. The who, what, why, where, who's going to do what, it has to be thought through. So I do spend time outside of class with the students. And I would say that I give about 50% of the reading that I normally do in a class, because there's all this extra work that needs to be done to launch a campaign.
Scott, there was a question earlier around the students, what they come in with in terms of their sense of social justice. Many of them have a more of a charity model of engagement, and just wondering how that factors into the way you teach the class and what happens during the class.
I think you have everything from the social justice student who's very aware of the race, class, gender issues. A lot of my students are social majors, so they've studied it and they know about it. And my students, because mostly are working class students of color, they've experienced it and they've seen their families and their communities. So they come in, but they don't think change is possible. They're questioning that. And that's why, just so you know, I'm bringing in almost every other class or every third class, I bring in a social action student, either through Zoom or in person, to talk for 10 or 15 minutes about their campaigns, because I want them to see students just like them who've led campaigns and had some either success or some success. So that's a key part of it, to give them the possibility that change is possible, because most of my students, I would say, don't believe change is possible, at least community change. So I'm always trying to deal with that. Any other questions?
2 more questions in the chat, Scott.
Have you students collaborate with other SEM and their courses to expand or enhance campaigns? I was doing a leadership program, and I was looking for something that was not as, because it was a 2-year leadership program on change. And it was just a lot for me fundraising wise. And a professor said, you should teach it all in one class. And that's when I started that in 2006, to teach it in one class. So now my work is on the campus and beyond, is to try to do exactly what you're doing, is to get other faculty to do so. So I've now teamed up with Robert Ovets from political science, who's doing it right this semester. I'm on leave, but I will work with Robert when I get back, and Amy DeAndre, who's teaching in social work. So there are multiple professors, and really kind of this is a dream, right? Just I'm dreaming here. So eventually there are various disciplines across campus doing social action. There might be campaigns that those students could work with, even thinking bigger. Santa Clara University, Stanford is very close, that students who are doing it, this will be taught at Stanford next year with 2 professors going to teach it in social action, that our students, if they happen to choose similar campaigns, could work, or they could work together on those. And then thinking bigger, shoot, you could do regions, you could do state, you could do federal. That's way down the line, but I'm thinking like that. And Rosemary, let's work together on figuring out how to do that. If you were hosting this in a co-curricular space as a fellowship, do you see any issues with giving a stipend? I have no problem at all. Let me say, that has been an issue on our campus because the minute the students finish the campaign, then a lot of times they're working, and if they're going to continue that campaign, they need finances. So I actually worked with a foundation, a local foundation. They are paying right now for 8 students to continue their campaigns because my students, they're working class, they're all working. So this provides them a 15 to 20 hours a week stipend for them to continue their campaign at about $16 an hour. So I don't have an issue with that at all. How do you have capacity for this teaching approach? So our teaching load is 4.4 on our campus. So it's very heavy. I don't teach any other service learning courses. I used to teach service learning as well, just too much. For me, by teaching half the reading is better for me too. So that's helpful. I have gotten course releases for this work. The university has given me that to do this work. And by the way, I want to say, if you're interested in doing this, our vision is to have 100 faculty to develop social action classes in the next several years. And we're going to go out, Bobby and I, right? We're going to try to get money for you to have a course development of $2,500 to do that. That's our vision, is to give you some resources so your time can be compensated. Do you have any limitations to the campaign model? I'm concerned with that we've narrowed social action because coordinating is mostly about campaigns. I'm keep on going for the question. My fear is that campaign and social action doesn't necessarily get to the root causes. So just getting local housing built, address the root causes of homelessness. I mean, the students are continually thinking about root causes. My goal is to get them started on the process of empowerment. My students have run for city council. My students have started a local online newspaper, getting at root causes. My students are working in the housing for the city. So yeah, you can't do everything in one class. Rather, I look at this as a start of empowerment. That's my perspective of getting them to feel that change is even possible, to get them down that line of a lifetime of the work around democracy. Do you have TAs? No, I wish I did. Interns? I have had interns who've taken the class and come back and help me. So that's true. What are the responsibilities and tasks? I tell them, because I can't be in all 5 groups at once, 4 or 5 groups of the campaigns that are going on, is to, serve as my kind of, do what I did with your group if they're taking that as interns. But it is helpful to have more eyes on the students. And if there's issues, then the intern can report back to me about what's going on.
Stephanie has a question.
Hi, thank you. This is really exciting. I love the energy and all of the questions. I'm learning so much even through the questions. I'm wondering about how you teach the students about advocacy and best practices in advocacy, especially around ethical considerations, and whether it's something that's in your text or if you use supplemental materials.
I look at advocacy as like you're working for someone else. And a lot of times these are the issues that the students are engaged with: racism on the campus, sexual harassment on the campus, getting an air conditioner where 3 students have fainted into a building, which they won that campaign, $3 million of that. So they're the ones I look at advocacy as advocating for someone else. Is that how you're looking at advocacy, or is it something different?
I was thinking about when you mentioned in the pitch session and the community partners who come in and try to encourage students to join them when we're advocating with, as opposed to advocating for, that kind of thing. Do the community partners tend to address that, or does that come up?
Absolutely, it's addressed. When we talk about 3 types of power: power for, power with, and power over. We spend a great deal of time on that. And the ones that are working with the community, one of the lessons that I present is one that came off our campus where students were working with folks that did not have their papers. And they agreed, the students that had their papers did not talk first. They let the folks that didn't have their papers talk always in the beginning. So that's just one example of a larger vision when you're working with the community and you're working in those organizations, is that you are really, how can we support the work that's happening and not take over at all, but be in solidarity with, rather than some other position. So for sure, that's talked about in the class and the community organizations, and they're very sensitive to it because they worked with food carts, for example. We won that campaign. The students won it along with them. But here's the deal. They couldn't get a meeting with the city council, the food carts folks. And these are people that were selling food near schools, and there were certain regulations, and they were very burdensome. And these are mostly marginalized folks in the Latino community. But in combination with the students got them that meeting with the city council, and they were appreciative. They were in the room, the food cart folks and the students, but the students didn't speak very much. They helped get the meeting, but then they took a background role to the food cart folks. So we talk about that and make sure that they're in solidarity rather than any other position.
Thank you.
So let me just say briefly in that class 16 on launching a campaign, there's a lot to talk about when you launch a campaign. I'll just show you one thing that we talk about with the students. This was a launch of the minimum wage campaign. We discuss media, and we're known for being a media force. The students are known for that. We're in the heart of Silicon Valley. We can get 4 or 5 cameras to most any event that the students do. We can get the San Jose Mercury and all the other major newspapers there because they know that when the student's doing something, it's going to be meaningful. That takes education. I teach you how to do that in class 16, but these are skills that many of you probably already have, like how to write a press release. The title is really important in capturing the drama of the situation, where to send the press release, to the assignment desk. The use of a media list. I actually give them my media list. It has like the top 30 assignment desks and reporters, but I only give it to them after they do the press release, and they send it to me to make sure it's in the form that is in the book, that it's following that form. So there's some quality control about that. And then they create media committees. When I tell them, put that on their resume, Stelia, she was the media outreach coordinator for the Students for Racial Justice. That's helped her get a job. And then recruitment committees, like how to actually get you using dry erase boards and commitment cards and flyering to get people. And we can generally get 20 to 30 students and sometimes 100 students to our events, but that's a whole process. I want to say this last part on campaign planning, implementation, evaluation. It's really day 17 to the end of class, day 31, the last class, which is getting them around a timeline, which is to have students realize that just because they did their opening campaign, their kickoff campaign, that's the beginning of the process, not the end. And there's going to have to do a series of events. So start to get them into this idea that there'll be a series of events, and it might be over a year to 2 years to start thinking long-term. And I gave these examples, cookie for a call, Post-it notes events. These are all fun things that the students actually develop that are in the book. They do a table, but they say, if you make this call right now to the president or to the city council or the mayor, you'll get a cookie. And the students came up with that, and we can get 100 calls into an office using that method. It's usually pretty successful. The Post-it notes is a really powerful one that they came up with. The students wrote down their housing insecurity stories on Post-it notes and then had those there so other students could see them. And then those were gathered and sent to the president. Again, a way to keep events going besides the more normal rallies. It could be occupations and so forth, but these are things that keep things forward. There are 3 ways a class can end. Victory, which means that they actually win. I always say it helps if a decision maker can make a mistake. The continuation of a campaign, the campaign notebook, that becomes key. And then students decide if that's going to continue or not, at least in the class. It might continue outside the class, but whether it continues in the class, which is helpful because they get all this energy. And then they might decide to end the campaign, which has happened where we just can't win. And the Gulf Coast Civic Works campaign ended with, we can't get a massive public works for the Gulf Coast. But what developed out of that was the minimum wage campaign. So sometimes even in loss, victory can come out of. And then a victory celebration. And maybe if we have time, I'll show you that victory celebration later, which is you should always celebrate if you have a win, your victories. So those are the 3 ways you can end. And then I would just say our last few words, the epilogue deals with the next semester. Do we offer another class? This helps because you can't usually generally win in a semester, even though we have. If not, get a team together who would teach this. So it's not, and Miriam at College of New Jersey has 5 faculty. The idea is that each one would teach a social action every semester. So it's always being taught. This idea of mainstreaming social action is one of our hopes. It's in section B. If you decide to do that, we're not going to just let you, do it by yourself. There's a teaching guide. There's a student guide. There's this access to the 9-month social action course development webinar series that we've done 1 of them. We might do another. I'll talk to Bobby about that, but you can at least watch it asynchronously. Christine, you can say a few words about what your experience has been in that development seminars.
Yes, absolutely. I'm here. Well, first, I'd like to say that I am thoroughly enjoying this webinar series. We've been meeting since October, once a month. We read, we write a few reflections, post them on the website, and we have a wonderful community of people to talk every month. So it's very doable. It's fun. You know, I've spent my whole life since early college doing organizing myself. This is about teaching students to do democracy, empowering them. And I'll tell you, I went into it with all of the kinds of questions I'm hearing many of you say: skepticism, worry about this, worry about that. The strength of this course for me has been the content has been very nuts and bolts, walks you through everything in the readings. The teacher's guide, which we've been reading along with Scott as he's been writing it. I've been also reading the student guide, so I know what students are reading, so I can plan my course. I'll be teaching this in the spring of next year. And so I've got a whole list of things myself that are going to help me to prepare as I'm going. So let me just say, Scott has been exceedingly generous in sharing his resources, his syllabus, other readings he uses, templates for assignments, examples. The book includes all of the portfolio questions that Scott's asks students to write. And those are wonderful, reflective questions that integrate academic work, theory, and praxis. And the webinar series really helps you realize you can teach this and you learn things as you go. You don't have to be a community organizer in order to teach this. You learn things as you go. It's fun. It helps you to navigate thorny issues. And this is the kind of thing that has come along for me at the right time in my career. So I am very excited about doing this. And I still have until the spring semester to plan out a list of things that I'm going to do. And I've got some assignments that I'm going to create in my courses in the fall that are also going to help me in my spring classes. I've loved it. Thank you.
I'm going to put my email again on the chat, just in case we don't know how to find each other. You can find me. Let me just show you real briefly two places where we have resources. One is we've had this course development. We have this learning platform, networking platform that we've been doing stuff. So this has been the course series right here that people are participating in. And then there's different topics that come up, questions that are being posed that people are responding to as they think through their class. So this is the Bonner Learning Community platform. We have a group within it specifically on teaching social action. And this is what we'll invite everybody to join if they're interested. It has different topics as we think about the piece, as well as the recordings of the various webinars we're doing. So this is the announcement of this one. We'll put the recording up here as well. The second place we have is the Bonner Wiki, which is where we put all the foundation resources. Anybody can get at this. We have a section on social action, and that has these 4 subsections, including guides, this book that Scott's been mentioning, and then the one that's forthcoming, as well as syllabi and other examples from various campuses, and various kind of documents and links to various kind of web presentations, books, articles, other organizations, the work of the Brown Group, those kinds of things will all be found here. So there's a couple of places we have to post resources, but also a way of gathering people remotely. I think when we're back to in-person kind of work, we started our work together actually with a big retreat, about 25 people out at the retreat center that Scott's involved with. But figuring out how we grow this is our big challenge, and trying to find some additional financial resources to do that. In lieu of having these big grants, I do think we'll probably end up running another one of these faculty development webinar series next school year. So get in touch with us. We'll put you on the different ways of staying in touch. And when we're ready to announce that, and trying to think about other ways we might move forward. A lot of you have a lot of experience organizing, including organizing networks. So any suggestions you guys have would be really, really welcome.
Yeah, and if you start thinking now of like who's that, because I really think it's important not to be by yourself on your campus. Who's that 1 or 2 other or 3 other faculty or staff that could join you on that? I think it's even better to have a team. So, because I think the question of the model is to have it taught every semester, at least one class. I mean, at San Jose State, there might be multiple classes, which is even better, kind of closer to our vision. But I think always have it going is really crucial. I do want to say, there are challenges to teaching the model. I have been the lucky person to have the provost, our number 2 person, who's responsible for the academic coursework, academic curriculum, and the vitality of our academy, come into my class to see what the hell was going on. I invited her into the class. I welcomed her into the class because I said, I'm not doing anything wrong. First, I'm within my rights as a faculty to teach about democracy and power. It's what social scientists do. There's no brainwashing going on. You come in and I guarantee you're going to love it. And she came in, was blown away and loved it. So I'm totally transparent. A newspaper guy was going to write a hit piece on me. I heard about it. I just called him. I said, come into my class. Come and see. He came in. He was very conservative, wrote for the Mercury News. He wrote a glowing report because he sees that there's a dynamic going on in the class, that there's not me going in there, you got to do this, that I'm like, these are my puppets. These are students engaged in democracy and asking all the tough questions, how to move forward to make the world better. So, and again, it's the students choosing. And we can have some conversations about, are there any campaigns you would not allow? And that's a good conversation to have. And I'm pretty open, but there are a few that I would not allow. You know, I'd say most campaigns are allowable, but I think it's good for us to have that conversation. I did want to invite Andy Mott, because Andy's, done an incredible amount of work in this area, leader in the field. Andy, do you want to say something about because you have a model around this as well, just to say a few words and let people know what that is, because it's really important.
Oh, thank you, Scott. I'm not exactly prepared, but let me explain. I'm with the Community Learning Partnership, which is a network of 14 programs in community colleges and public universities, where we're really aiming at developing organizers. It wasn't just teaching a course in community organizing. And so we offer at each of those places several courses which are interrelated: community organizing, participatory action research, political economy, and so on, which are aimed specifically to reach as much as possible low-income and working class people of color, who are potential organizers and leaders in their communities in the future. We have about 1,000 students enrolled in these 14 programs. We have 5 more programs which will be started at the end of the year. We also have a paid internship program in California, which will reach about 200 students at 5 community colleges, where they will be paid a substantial amount of money, about $8,000 or $10,000 a year, as they go through our program at these different community colleges. So we're working on a number of different fronts, but the basic purpose is developing the next generation of people, particularly people of color and low-income working class backgrounds, for organizing in the communities that are most disadvantaged. Thank you very much. I just wrote a book, by the way, which is probably worth people looking at. It's online at clp.org, Community Learning Partnership, clp.org. It's called Preparing to Win, and it's about what we've learned about developing community leaders, organizers, and allies in these 14 programs.
Thank you, Andy. I just think it's important, that this is one model that what I'm talking about here. There are other models out there that are, important, and it's nice when we're all together. Obviously, the Brown organizing initiative, that's really important too. That we're kind of involved in that as well. So just know that much is going on, and I just want to maybe end with, most of all, you probably feel the same way, is that we are desperate need to teach about democracy and power to our students and to preserve our democracy. So that's where I'm at on this. What's nice about this one class for me personally, rather than because I'd done a 2-year leadership program, is that you can integrate it in without too much disruption to all of your other rest of life. You can still live your other life. This class has allowed me to still do the good work, but to work it into an academic life.
I just want to, Scott, just for you to talk for a second as we end about your graduates. There's a comment in the chat about, well, what if I do want to brainwash my students? In other words, make them activists, and not on a particular angle maybe necessarily, but just get them to really want to believe in making change. And I think that Scott's not doing that change. He's not making that happen in them. Doing the work is what's changing them. Getting them up in front of the press is what's making that change happen. And these are folks, many of whom who've never had a voice, never thought they could have a voice. In the course of this semester, by being thrown in the deep end early and realizing I can do it, it changes them. And Scott, if you just talk about some of the graduates real briefly. I know you've been reaching out to them as part of the book.
Yeah, so I think it's like 15 graduates, and it's not all of them, but it gets you, and I just kind of chose one every couple of years or one every year in the book. So I'm glad to, maybe I could send that to everybody too. I'll send you what they're doing right now. And what's amazing about it is several of them are community organizers. Some of them did become, like, Rochelle Jackson Smar, she became a community organizer for SEIU, did that work, then went back and got her master's and now her PhD. And she sees herself kind of taking my role doing this kind of work as a college professor. But I have other folks who are working with the Linsky organization, who are doing that community organizing, plus just a huge variety of everything from a vice principal of an elementary school in a very marginalized community to working in housing for the city. As Alicia says, and when she talks to my students, and she's the one that's working for the San Jose City Housing, she says, I was taught to follow, not to lead, not to have empowerment. I was taught just to listen. And that's the change that happens, I think Bobby's talking about, is that students, by being thrown in and learning that they have a voice, that voice continues throughout their work, throughout their life, really. And these students, my students anyway, stay in the valley, stay in the Silicon Valley. They generally don't go very far. And that's changing. Now we've had 14 years of this class, 15 years, that's changing Silicon Valley, because there are many of which are leaders in the nonprofit government organizations of our community. And I think that's the hope too, right? You want to say something, Ken?
Just applauding Scott, what Scott's saying, that it's not just teaching people who become organizers. I teach at Tufts also. It's a thin sliver of people, but it's more infusing public life with people who've had these practical experiences of having yourself heard and mobilizing people, whether it's a parent, consumer, neighbor, throughout your life. So that's all. Scott's doing great. You guys are doing great work.
I'll just end with what my students in 1029, just end with his last thought. My students, when they did the minimum wage campaign, the mayor came out and said the biggest single threat to San Jose is the minimum wage campaign. And my students, they were like, dang, we're the single greatest threat in San Jose. They took it as like a badge of honor that the mayor in his speech about the state of city of San Jose would mention the minimum wage campaign, which they came up with. And that's the kind of empowerment that goes on with, and my students who've never done social action, many of which never done it, working class, mostly students of color, they feel like they are part of, and by the way, they're the only students on our campus that can name every city council member, the mayor, the assembly member, the senator, the state senator. They know them all because they met with most of them in their campaigns. And so that's the kind of civic life that our students come out of this experience with.
Thank you. Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.